Welcome to episode 48 of the Midwest Angler Podcast. Scott Sturman, Matt Deitch, episode 48. I don't got anything to say.
48.
48.
That's just kind of one of them numbers. It's like 48. All right.
Who's your favorite? Jimmy Johnson. He was a NASCAR driver. He was number 48. You got
I wasn't a big Jimmy Johnson fan.
I'm not a big NASCAR fan, so.
All right. No other 48s.
No other 48s.
Trying to think of any like legendary 48s.
I feel like there's got to be, like, what was Mike Allstott? Was he 40 or 44?
He's 40. Yeah.
40.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got no 48s.
There's no Zebco 48s. There's only Zebco 44s and 404s and 33s, I guess. So.
Well, you know who is number 48?
Who?
Taylor Mellenthin.
That's 40, and he's number 48. He's
number 48.
He's guest for episode 48.
Taylor Mellenthin, East Grand Forks, Minnesota, not North Dakota. He did say that he could see North Dakota from his porch.
Oh, yeah.
So that's who we got today. It's going to be a killer cool episode, something that we haven't talked about before.
Right, yeah, he's going to be talking a little bit about spearing today and all of his adventures along with Fish Addictions TV, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, have you ever speared?
I think I can remember going with my grandpa when I was like really young. We'd always used to go over to Lake Ochita in southwest Minnesota, but
yeah, I think when we did the Deitch Boys episode, I think your grandpa had actually talked a little bit about going spearing back in the day and whatnot.
Well, they always used to do it, and there's still a lot of people that do it quite a bit.
I think it's really gaining popularity again.
I think so too.
I mean, something different and
oh, for sure.
Yeah. Well, like we said, we got Taylor Mellenthin. We're going to talk spearing, we're going to talk fish addictions, and we're going to get right over to him. Hey, Taylor, are you there, man?
Yep, I'm here.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on today. Yeah, definitely one that we've been looking forward to talking to, and last week when we talked to you at the Ice Institute, we thought, hey, now's the time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, appreciate you guys calling me and asking me to do this. I'm a little maybe rougher on the edges doing these podcasts. This, I think, is probably the second podcast I've probably ever done, so you boys might have to help me out a little bit here along the way.
Hey, no problem.
If we can do it, anybody can do it.
That's right.
Hey, there you go.
So tell us first, Taylor, where you're from and kind of the bodies of water that you're fishing right now.
I currently reside in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, so for those that don't know where that's at, we are right on the border of Minnesota and North Dakota and about an hour south of the Canadian border. So as far as water that I fish around here, there's places to go east and west, but maybe the double-bladed sword there is that, you got to go about an hour in each direction to find some water to fish. So like I said, I currently reside in East Grand Forks, Minnesota right now. Moved up here 9 years ago now. The reason being, I moved from my hometown of Marshall, Minnesota, and my wife, which at then was my girlfriend, was currently residing in Grand Forks and attending the University of North Dakota. She kind of drugged me up here. I kind of drug my feet a little bit, but I made it up here. We've been happy up here now for about 9 years, been married for 5. We've got 2 children now, and we really like it here. It's a really nice place to raise a family, and kind of being the outdoorsy guy that I am, I like to do a little bit of hunting, a little fishing, probably a little fishing more than anything, but it's kind of a great place to be, and we have decided that this is where we're going to make it a home, and we wish to be here for quite a while.
Right on. Well, you're like an hour and a half to the east of Devil's Lake, and how far are you from like Lake of the Woods there?
Lake of the Woods, we're about, I'd say 2.5 hours. It's kind of a tricky deal to get up there from here. You either have to take the interstate to Drayton and then head northeast through the Carlstead, Greenbush, Roseau area, or you can go east and you can head north on like 220 out of town. But yeah, it seems like it's pretty close, being that we're only an hour from the Canadian border, but it's still a jaunt to the east. But like you said, Devil's Lake is kind of, I would say, what I would call home body water. I spent a couple years guiding out there for Bry's Guide Service. I learned a lot, and it's a place that's really a challenge and I like that challenge. When it comes to fishing is something that you have to go out and you have to find those fish. We're in the midst of deer season right now where those deer kind of come to you. Well, fishing has always intrigued me and interested me because that's something you have to go out and make the best of it, and you really have to put the time into it. So Devil's Lake is that place to me where in my heart I really enjoy fishing just because of the terrain and the geography and how much things have changed in the past few years. And it's really interesting for me to go out and learn every time that I'm on the water out there and learn different things and fish different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things that you said to us when we were talking to you last week at the Ice Institute was the water levels over west of you a ways were way lower. And for the rest of us in the Midwest, we think that that's absolutely crazy because the rest of the Midwest is absolutely drenched. But tell us a little bit about the water levels over to the west of you and how they didn't get any rain this year.
Right. It's, there was kind of a cutoff, like you said, west of here, maybe about an hour, maybe 45 minutes west of here where the rain didn't hit it as hard. We were pretty wet here in the Red River Valley and Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, but over in the Devil's Lake area, they're still kind of dealing with the dropping water levels on the lake. They had proposed the idea that they were going to keep the pumps running. Now, when I talk about pumps, they first built the pumps and they put them in on the very southeastern part of the lake, on the East Devil's Lake side, if you're not familiar with the lake. But they put the pumps in 2011, and those pumps haven't shut off since they were installed. And right now they're kind of in a, I would maybe not call it a disagreement, but it's kind of one of those scales right now, a tipping scale, where you don't know what's potentially going to happen. You have farmers and agriculture that are hoping those pumps stay running. The farmers get a lot of this land back, and then you have the side of it with the tourism, and you have the anglers that want to keep that water level high because Devil's Lake really isn't the biggest city, and where a lot of that income and economics comes from is people traveling there and spending money in the town, and a big portion of that is fishing. So right now it's kind of a struggle with some resorts and some guide services. They're kind of, they're worried a little bit about what's going to happen and what the future can hold. They've decided to keep pumping, and with the lower water levels, like we said, the lake is almost down about 4.5 to 5 feet. So it's going to be interesting this ice season to see what happens, and I'm actually curious myself to see how the fish react to these low water levels.
So, yeah, you talk about that with the fish and everything like that. What does this low water levels mean for, like, the ice fishing this year?
So, people that have traveled out to the Devil's Lake area, and maybe some that even reside there too, have experienced some fishing in areas where maybe you wouldn't suspect would be that great. You've got some of your basin areas and maybe some of your north lakes where, you're talking waters that are shallower than 8-7 feet up there where you're catching fish. And those waters were 7-8 feet, 4 or 5 years ago, and the fishing was abundant, and those fish were there, and they were biting, and it was, definitely a feast fest going on. Well, now just think of, fishing at 8-foot water levels. Your water is now residing in about the 2.5 to 3 foot water levels. If we experience some of the winters that we've had in the past, 3 to 4 years, where we get almost 3+ feet of ice, you're talking a lot of those high probability fishing areas where those fish are going to be completely frozen. Now, I think what that interprets to is, you get a lot of your bait, you get a lot of your food source that either moves to a different area or that just isn't there anymore. That definitely affects the fishing. So where I'm curious is what's going to happen now to when, late in the season we get all this ice, say we get a bunch of snow like we've had in the past too, oxygen levels are also going to drop. And what does that do to the fishing? So we're in for a really interesting ice season. Come spring, I guess we'll know what's going to happen for sure. But right now I'm kind of nervous about what's going to happen on a lot of those bays and lakes, and maybe parts of the main lake as well. Some of those fish are either going to have to congregate in areas where they're not used to, or they hopefully will be able to travel into some of those areas where they can find a food source and they can survive this tough winter we might be ahead of us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, well, of course, last week, like I said, we talked to you at the Ice Institute, and me and Matt were like, "Oh man, we can't wait for ice," and you were like, "Well, yeah, you know, you couldn't wait for ice neither." But the fact of it could really have some bad effects on some of those lakes up there, and that's just something that me and Matt and probably some of the listeners never really stopped to think about. Was you get ice this early, and if it stays really late, I mean, the oxygen levels, like you said, and you know, kill-offs. I mean, we saw a lot of kill-offs last year down here in South Dakota, and yeah, that's just something that we didn't think about.
Right. That's probably the biggest implication is having all of that ice. Like you're saying there, if you get ice early, that's a longer season you're going to have. That means less oxygen. That means, you know, some of those areas that freeze completely, as I was saying, and that's what might end up hurting a lot of these lakes that we're talking about, maybe up north and even some of the Devil's Lake area.
Now, talking about like Devil's Lake, it's kind of a destination spot for a lot of people. It's kind of on Scott and my bucket list. How is the fishing up there looking like this year? They still getting into the jumbo perch like they always used to? Is it not as good as what it once was? And the walleye are more popular now. What's like the fishing outlook up there?
Right now, we're experiencing a pretty good population of perch and perch fishing. The fish are a little bit on the bigger side right now. If you get into them on the main bays, you can find the giant pods of them kind of wandering around, but you might not have the bigger fish mixed in with those giant pods of fish. A lot of times you find some of these bigger fish roaming or acting like they're walleyes, where they tend to be a little bit shallower, which, you know, can be surprising, but at the same time it isn't surprising because they can also be a predator. You know, when they reach that 13 to 14 inch range, you're talking about almost a 2-pound perch. I don't think there's going to be a lot of walleyes that are going to try to take down a 13 or a 14 inch perch, or even a pike for that matter. So, you know, the walleye fishing was pretty consistent this summer and was pretty good. A lot of guys were experiencing a lot better walleye fishing on the main lake this year, and there tended to be fish kind of congregating in those areas that they were probably, you know, 10, 15 years ago. And a lot of those fish might have congregated from those areas, from the shallow back to those spots, because now we're, like we were talking about earlier, they're getting into those, you know, the shallow water spots. So, you know, now they're tending to move, and they're constantly moving. And that's the biggest thing about Devil's Lake, is these fish are always on the move. So as far as the perch and the walleye fishing goes, still, you know, just as good as ever. We might be seeing a trend downward as the water levels drop here now, but I don't think this year will have a big effect on it, but maybe the couple years here in the future might be kind of tricky. So, you know, the biggest factor though is this winter and what the ice and the snow does.
Now, Taylor, we don't want you to give up any secrets, but for a listener that's listening, if they've had Devil's Lake on their bucket list for a while, if they were to come up there and give it a shot, what's some advice that you could give them? What's your go-to bait for them perch? You know, where should they start? You know, what are some of the tips you could give?
Well, I think I'll just keep it simple. If you have the ambition and you plan on really putting the effort into it, I would say, you know, go ahead and try it yourself. The biggest bear of it all is that Devil's Lake is a huge body of water, and you're talking about 250,000 plus acres of fishable water. It's a huge, huge area to try to tackle in say a weekend, and it can be really depressing at sometimes, you know, not finding fish right away. And excuse me, some people have gone the route of, you know, hiring a guide service to try to figure out the lake a little bit, and a lot of times that can be seriously beneficial. A lot of people, like you say, are making the long trek up here because it is such a destination and a place that's, far away from, say, an Iowa or Wisconsin. And sometimes it can be really frustrating to go out and not find fish when people are expected to come to Devil's Lake and catch those jumbo perch and catch big walleyes. So, the biggest thing is those perch, they really like to school up. And the hard part about it is they like the flats, they like the basins. So if you're going to fish the main lake, you're going to want to look for any of those flat basins where it's in the 20 to 40 feet, and you can even get past that too once you really get into the realm of winter there, where it's late in the season. They'll even push out into the 40s and 50 feet. So, and then you can also run into some white bass, so that can be fun as well. But as far as the perch go and where to start there, they'll start to trend from the shallower water to the deeper water in the winter, and walleyes will do the same. They'll start up shallow in the mornings, and then they'll work their way out. So there's so many places to fish on Devil's Lake, and there's really an abundance of fish. But like I said, sometimes it can be frustrating. So if you're planning on making a trip up and maybe you don't have all the gear and you don't want to go out and be real ambitious, I would probably go the guide route, just because the water can be so frustrating at some points. But if you're going to do it yourself and be ambitious, do your homework, look into different articles guys have written about fishing, look into, use your social media and figure out where some of these fish can be located, because it can be a real bear in the winter.
Right. You told us now that you used to work for Bry's Guide Service, guiding up there on Devil's Lake, but you also do something really cool, and you film some TV shows for fish addictions. How did that come about?
So it actually kind of ties into my everyday occupation here. I started 9 years ago working for Mike Olson with Greenworks Landscaping and Fencing in Grand Forks, and Mike had started Fish Addictions, and initially was just a YouTube channel, and from there it turned into something bigger, and it's now turned into a TV show and something to be proud of. And I kind of started with Mike. I wasn't one of the founders, but I was asked to help and do some of the filming stuff and go along on some of these trips. And I've really kind of grown as an angler, and it's been a lot of fun to go on these destination trips to these different areas. We did episodes a few years back where we've gone to the Sheboygan area, we've gone to Saginaw, we've been to Michigan, Wisconsin, and you have your episodes around here of the Devil's Lake and the Lake of the Woods and Red Lake, and it's more fun to go do it with a group of anglers that share the same passion that you do, and you can really lay back and have fun with these guys. It's more of fun. It's not work. So that's the biggest joy that I get out of it, is learning from these guys and having the fun and the camaraderie that comes with it.
Now, it's kind of a semi-live show, right? Like, you guys will go on a trip, and like in a week or two, that's when that episode will air, if you have enough for a show. And some of them are pre-recorded, like last year's when they followed Mike and Robert and Drake on the NWT tour.
Right. Yeah, that's what's so astonishing about it to me, even being a part of it, is that we'll fish a lake, and not even sometimes 4 or 5 days later there's an episode airing out, and that's kind of the way that the fishing shows have gone now, is that people want this content that's immediate. They don't want to watch an episode that was filmed, potentially 2 years ago or last year, where that might not even be relevant anymore, and then those fish might not even be there. And the tactics have maybe changed since that episode has been filmed to air. So that's the coolest thing about it, is a lot of this is fresh, and it's coming off the cameras, a week or sometimes 2 weeks, and that's all the time it takes to do some editing. And I really give props to the editors on the Fish Addiction staff that are able to provide this content and do it so well in such a short amount of time.
Now, we had Marcus Quam on here a few weeks ago, and he does in-depth outdoors, and we asked him, but we're going to ask you, is TV hard? Like, do you ever look back at yourself on TV and like, holy smokes, I was really talking funny there, or, boy, I look funny. Like, was it hard the first time that you looked at yourself on TV and did you critique yourself?
It's funny you say that because I can't stand the way that I sound and the way that I look on TV, and even on probably this podcast. I'll probably go back and listen to myself and say, what is this guy talking about? So it's kind of a thing that you practice and practice, and you try to get better at presenting yourself and talking about things. But I've found that the more honest that you can be with the viewers and the more honest that you can be on camera is the better it turns out. Everything just comes, emotionally instead of scripted. And that a lot of times is some of the best footage you can get, is when your true emotions show, and people can relate to that too when they see your true emotions.
Now, how often do you have it when you're cruising around in East Grand Forks or taking your wife out for supper? Do you have people come up to you like, hey, I know you, or not very often?
Yes and no. There's people that I've fished with around here that, they'll come up to me and say, hey, how's the fish addictions thing going? And that's because they've known me. But I've had it a couple times out in the Devil's Lake area, actually, where, I'll be wearing some clothing or something, and a guy will come up and say, where's the next episode? And I'll, kind of be caught off guard, and I'll go, oh, yeah, oh, okay, you recognize me, yeah. Actually, I don't know. We don't know where we're going yet. I mean, I'm trying to get word right now where we're going to go for the next episode, and, I try to keep it real with people and just talk about fishing, just get back onto that. I don't, myself personally, I don't really want the fame that comes with it, I guess. I'm just like everybody else. I like to fish. I like to talk about fishing. I like to exaggerate fishing,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, it's cool when people recognize you, but at the same time, I kind of get a little caught off guard because I'm just like everybody else out there. I'm fishing from the banks. I'm fishing on the boat. I'm trying to just chase fish. That's what I have fun doing.
What's probably your most memorable episode that you got to be a part of?
Oh, that's tough. We went to Sheboygan 2 years ago now, and we chased steelhead through the ice on the river, and that was something that was completely out of my realm. I had never even caught a trout before that, let alone it was a rainbow, a steelhead, a brown trout, a brook trout, any of that. So that was all new to me. So everything that we did was interesting to me, and I was totally intrigued by it, and it was nothing that I've ever done before. So just to touch base on that episode a little bit, we were fishing in water as shallow as 1 to 2 feet in the river, and to fight some of those fish and the caliber of those fish that are out there in that river was amazing. When you talk about having to stick your arm halfway down a hole to free up the line on the ice hole so that fish doesn't snap that line and you don't have all that resistance on the edge of your hole because you're fighting a fish in a foot of water, was something that was really interesting to me. And I've never had to deal with that, where you got to free up your line so you can get these fish in. They had some serious power, and we ended up catching quite a few nice fish, some steelhead. I caught a really nice brown trout, which I thought it was pretty spoiled because, this was kind of a once in a lifetime deal, and it really panned out towards the end.
Yeah, when you're in 1 to 2 foot of water, that fish has no place to go but sideways. It's not like you're in 30 foot and you just got to lift them up. That's a crazy fight. Not anything that I would personally know about, but
right. It was so strange to just have those fish fight you horizontally, like you say. We're so used to fighting fish, vertically, where these fish, they get in a current seam and they just take off and they peel you out. And that was what was so much fun about it, is you're using some of the lighter tackle with a heavy rod, but at the same time there's a lot of finesse that goes with it, and a lot of times there's not a lot of room, like you're talking, with that less than 2 feet. So that was probably one of the funnest episodes I've ever been on, and I'm not sure if I'll top that, but I'd love to get back out there and do something like that again, because it blew my mind catching these fish in less than 2 feet of water and getting up to that 10, 15 pound range.
Yeah, that is crazy. Now, another thing that you brought up when I was setting up this interview with you is spearing. You said that you've been doing a lot of spearing, and I don't know, I guess I can't speak for Matt, but for me personally, I've never done any spearing. Tell us a little bit about spearing, how you go about that, because obviously you're not punching a 6-inch hole. What goes into that?
So yeah, spearing is something that, might be kind of a lost art. You've got some of your old timers that grew up spearing and guys, around northern Minnesota that did a lot of it. I didn't grow up spearing. It's something that really interested me in the last about 5 years now. And Bry's Guide Service does a lot of that too. And I learned a lot from a lot of those guys. They were really passionate about it, and it was really cool to see how much people enjoyed it. And that was something that I really thought was something you could tap into and something that people would enjoy doing. So I took it upon myself to figure out how to do this, and it's still a learning curve, as everything is. You have your days where things don't go as well as you would hope they do, but when it comes to the spearing, it's tough because it's not a catch and release sport. Obviously, there is no returning that fish to the water. It's a harvest, and that fish needs to be taken care of properly. And the reason being why they allow it is for the management, obviously. And Devil's Lake is fortunate enough to allow the spearing because they have maybe I would call it an overabundance of pike, and maybe a lot of those fish are actually stunted in some of those northern lakes. So it's actually healthy for the lake to do that. And sometimes you might get your frustrations with people of the spearing game because you're not allowing those fish to get to a certain length, but in the end, it's part of a management system that the North Dakota Game and Fish has come up with, and so far it's been really successful. So just to touch back a little bit on how to go about the spearing, the biggest thing is clarity. And in the Devil's Lake area, it's really hard to sometimes find the clear water to spear these fish. Sometimes you're talking about visibility less than a foot or 2 feet in certain parts of the year, because you're dealing with so much moving water from lake to lake, and that's where it can be tricky to be successful at it. So a lot of times is just spent searching for clear enough water where you can even spear. And then, another factor is there even going to be fish there where there's that clear water? So the big thing that I tell people is to try to find a lot of those structure areas where you're talking road beds, you're talking sunken trees, maybe rock piles. But a lot of those pikes still stay shallow in the winter, and they love that shallow water. There's a huge food source there. It's still there in the winter, and they'll stick around in some of those shallower areas and those shallow bays, and that's where I tend to do a lot of my spearing. So it's been a learning curve the last 5 years that I've been doing it, and I've learned a little bit more here and there. But it's your basic setup with your decoys and your spear, and I've tried to get into a little bit of the filming aspect of it lately and trying to film some of that stuff. But as I stated, there's still that, gray area where people don't know if it's ethical or not, or if, you're hurting the population. But, they allow it in areas where it can be done, and it can be done successfully. And so it keeps the population strong. So I've had a blast doing it, and I encourage anybody that wants to or has the opportunity to go spearing to try it, because it's almost like you're deer hunting. It's more of a kind of a primitive sport where you're waiting for that fish to come by, and if you can trick that fish and successfully harvest that fish is the real joy of it once you're done. And that's I've really enjoyed it the past 5 years, so I hope I can learn even more and maybe teach it to others that want to come out and do it.
Now, what do you use to drill the holes? Do you just use a regular auger and drill a bunch of them like by each other, or do you have like one of those ice saws?
Yeah, so I kind of just went right into the stories behind it there and didn't really explain, so apology there. But yeah, what I'd like to do is I'll drill sometimes about 6 to 8 holes in about a 3 foot by 4 foot pattern. Then I'll take the saw. I believe I have a Nils saw is what it is. It's your traditional breakaway saw, and I'll cut in between each hole, and then I'll probably cut cut that iceberg into another half, and then I'll bring a tongs with, and then I'll pull those ice cubes out later in the season. But early in the season, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll do the same thing. You'll cut your grid of holes, you'll cut that sheet of ice out, and then you'll slide that sheet of ice into the water if you don't think that's going to be detrimental for you to seeing fish, and that's not going to disrupt those fish down there. So, there's tons of different ways that people have gone about cutting holes. This personally is my kind of best option. I like to have about a 3 foot by 4 foot area where I can get over the hole and see what I'm looking at. And like I said, if I can get away with shoving that ice under, that's great. If not, then I'll remove those chunks. And then the biggest thing is, the safety when it comes to spearing too is you definitely want to mark holes. They recommend you bring some wooden laths or some dowels with, or even something that's natural around the shoreline where you can mark that hole, because it could potentially be a dangerous object for, others that are out there trying to do some fishing or snowmobiling or anything of that matter. So a big thing there is safety as well. So
now, kind of explain to the listeners that don't possibly know about spearing. Like you said, you got a 3 by 4 foot hole, and then you kind of stand on top of that hole, straddling it, and you wait for a fish to swim below you that you bring in by a decoy, and you basically just throw a spear at it. Correct?
Right. Yeah. It's like I said, it's kind of a primitive thing where I try not to think about it too much, and I try not to do too much. I try to keep it as basic as possible. I tend to tell people, you really don't need the latest and greatest and the biggest and the baddest of the stuff to do it. It's about as simple as it gets. We all know pike are very aggressive. They can be triggered by just about anything. I'll jokingly say, throw a pop can down there and they'll probably hit it. I mean, that's how aggressive you're talking about fish are on the Devil's Lake system. They're either that hungry or they're just that aggressive. So I'll suggest to people, keep it simple. Just, buy a couple simple decoys right away. You don't have to have the greatest gear. But like you said, you're basically straddling the hole. You're jigging that decoy. And what I like to do is I'll get a rattle reel, and I'll coil some line up on that rattle reel, and I'll attach that decoy to it, and I'll usually attach the rattle reel to the top of the hub house. And that's another thing I guess I didn't touch about either, is I do a lot of my spearing out of the hub house. I've got an Eskimo 949i, and the big thing to me is having that black interior so you can see well enough to see those fish. So if you're talking about a sunny day and that sun is going to reflect through the ice, and you're going to be able to see those fish really well if you're able to darken your house up. So, they call it dark house spearing. Well, the misconception is that you've only been able to do it out of a hard-sided shack. Recently, companies have gotten into the hub style, and that black interior has really made it beneficial to spearing out of and being more mobile. And that's basically how I like to do my spearing, is through a hub house, and that black interior has been good enough to see those fish swimming around. So, there isn't just the hard-sided house approach to it. You can be mobile and do it as well, but that just depends on how hard you want to be on your arms for that day and cutting holes.
Now, how deep a water do you want to be in? I mean, are you trying to pin these fish down to the ground when you're driving the spear, or don't you have to?
So I'll typically spear anything from 4 to 12 feet. I think I speared last year, and the clarity out west here isn't as good once you start to get past that 8 foot range. So I tend not to spear in anything deeper than that. I'm not saying you're not going to have any success spearing deeper. You might find that clear water and find fish in deeper water, but I tend to stay in that 4 to about 10 feet, somewhere in there, and that allows you to see a lot of those fish from anywhere from the bottom of the ice to that 6 feet. Sometimes I can't see the bottom if I'm in 6-7 feet, but if I can see those fish up the water column when they're coming through and trying to strike at that decoy, that's plenty. So and then when it comes to actually launching the spear at these fish, the biggest key is the misconception might be you need to take your spear and throw it as hard as possible as you can at that fish, and that's generally not the case. What I try to explain to people is you think about throwing a dinner plate in the water, and if you tried to throw that as hard as you could, you're going to have a lot of wavering that happens there, and maybe some flipping. So when it comes to a spear, you're gonna want to more of just a release. I try to tell people that you want to be directly above that fish, just under the water. And when that fish is in range, you're not doing much of a throw. You're actually doing more of a release and just in the general direction of that fish. So your spear should be heavy enough and sharp enough where that it's going to make a good shot on that fish as to where you wouldn't injure that fish. And that's the biggest thing, is trying not to do too much. Actually, you want to just release that spear and hopefully make a good shot on those fish.
So what's the biggest northern that you've speared?
I tend to let some of the bigger ones swim by. If it's under 40 inches, I think those are more of the fish that I generally like to harvest.
Right.
If you get something bigger than 40 inches, I kind of consider that a trophy, and I would much rather watch that fish swim by and maybe have him hit my decoy a couple times and really, watch him work. And that's kind of where I get excited about that. Is it hard not to throw the spear at something that big? It definitely is. But there are some people that also trophy hunt too and spear. So I'm not one to judge on what people can harvest and take, but a lot of times I'll try to let those bigger fish swim by, and I'll try to harvest some of those smaller fish that are coming into the strike zone.
Right on.
How often do you have them come in so stinking fast and smack your decoy that you never even really get a chance?
Oh, that is probably half the time you're sitting there looking down that hole. You've got days where you'll harvest 5 fish, but you'll probably see 30 fish. And that's really the cool thing about Devil's Lake, is you've got an abundance of pike where you're going to be busy, and a lot of those fish congregate in the same areas. And like you said, sometimes they'll come in so fast that you catch a glimpse of it, or he'll hit the decoy, and by the time you look down because you were distracted, he's already gone. So the biggest thing is trying to slow some of those fish down so you can actually get a good shot at them. But they're so aggressive, like we talked about, that sometimes they don't present that opportunity to put a shot on them. But as you said, they can be so fast and so ferocious that sometimes it just doesn't work out. Sometimes they're feeding so fast that you can't get a hold of them.
Do you have a lot of other type of fish come in and look at the decoy?
I really haven't. I've maybe had 2 or 3 times where I've seen some perch, but I would suspect that I would have saw some walleyes, because a lot of times those walleyes will be cruising around or maybe mingling with some of those pike too. But unless I haven't been aware of it, and maybe they're just too much of a bottom dweller, the walleyes are, that they just cruise by and I'm not able to recognize that that's a walleye. But I don't see a whole lot of other species. I generally tend to just see more of the pike that swim by. So yeah, that's a good question. But for myself personally, I haven't seen a whole lot of other species. A lot of times it's more of the pike.
And the pike are the only one that you can actually spear, correct?
Correct, yep. I know there's some underwater spear fishing that you might be able to do west of here, but haven't gotten into that realm yet. So as far as I know, the only things that you can spear are the northerns and any rough fish. So
right.
That is also allowed, because that would be like how you can shoot some carp in the spring and stuff like that. So any rough fish or northern pike is acceptable.
I don't think it's even legal here in Iowa, is it?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Minnesota and North Dakota, I think.
Right. And I don't think it's legal in Wisconsin either, other than sturgeon.
Oh,
I know they have the area where they can spear the sturgeon there, which that would be one heck of a spear fight there. So
no doubt.
Moly.
Well,
I've seen a couple episodes on that, and that's pretty intriguing. But I've fished the Lake of the Woods area and the Rainy River where you get into the sturgeon too, and I couldn't imagine what it's like spearing a sturgeon.
now after you spear them or spear a pike, is there quite a fight afterwards, or does it kind of stun them and you pull them right out?
There is a fight. They're trying to do the same thing that they're doing when they're on a hook and a line. So they are trying to escape once they realize that, that was a bad decision that they made to look at that decoy. So they will dart off to the side. And when you're bringing that rope in that's attached to your spear, what I tend to do is I try to reel in, nice and slow. And when I'm bringing that fish up through the hole, I'll keep those tines pinned against the hole in case that fish starts to wiggle its way through those tines. Now you have your barbs on your spear that are designed to keep that fish on, but we have barbs on our hooks as well when we're pulling fish through the hole. And when that fish reaches the surface, that's kind of the last run of that fish. And we've all dealt with the fish that gets off right at the hole and down it goes. So, I'm trying to keep that fish pinned when I'm bringing it through the hole, because that's another big thing too, is I don't want that wounded fish to get away. So
right. Now, before we let you go, Taylor, what are the plans for the rest of the winter?
Oh, as we kind of touched on there with fish addictions, I'd like to make a couple episodes this year. I don't know where that's going to be quite yet, but the big thing is probably I'd love to do even more spearing. It's something that just really interests me. And the other thing is I love trying new bodies of water too, and not even the destinations away from here. I like trying things that people would look at and shake their head at and say, why would you fish that? Well, there can be some of those bodies of water that you don't know have fish in it, or maybe they're not sampled, or maybe they're not stocked. So that's a cool thing about the Dakotas, is you'll find some of these lakes that have good fish in it. And I just find it really interesting going out and searching, and when a plan comes together, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. So yeah. I would say this year a little bit more focus on the spearing and finding new areas and making a few more fish addictions episodes, because I have a lot of fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You think you've caught more fish since you started growing the mustache?
I know Seth Fighter has.
Well, yeah, there's no doubt about that.
I think it's a good luck deal. I like it. I'm for it.
Mine's a little bit greasy. I get a
guff
for that. So it's all in good fun. I don't try to take myself too seriously when it comes to the fishing. So yeah, maybe it has helped a little bit. You catch a pike, and grab a little slime off the pike and slap it in the mustache, and I bet that's where the next one comes from. So you gotta give it up to the fish god sometimes.
That's right.
I'm for it. No, Taylor, we really appreciate you swinging in. That was a fun episode. The spearing, like I said, is something that we've never covered before, and actually it was something that I never even thought about until you brought it up. So we really appreciate that. We appreciate the North Dakota deal, because we haven't had that yet. And we look forward to hopefully talking to you here maybe come spring and get a little recap on the year.
Alrighty. I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for calling me. I had a blast doing this. And like I said, if you get the opportunity to go on a spear trip, I'd probably take it, because it's really exhilarating.
Definitely.
Perfect. Thanks, man.
Alrighty. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye.
And there he goes, Taylor Mellenthin from Fish Addictions TV.
I'm not going to lie to you. I've always thought his last name was Mellenthin.
Well.
And so when we've said Mellenthin now, I don't know. I keep getting worried that I'm going to say it wrong, and I guess it's really not that big a deal, because it's not like we're going to botch the show.
Well, I mean, I guess we could call him Millen Flo.
Millen Flo. God, his hair is just buck nasty awesome. I love it. He's got the I even thought about this the other day. Like, I was going to ask him if he was a hockey player.
Well, we know what the secret behind it all is. Just get a little northern slime in there and you get that flow going.
Sickest flow, bro. No, well, yeah, like we said, thanks, Taylor, for stopping in and chatting with us. That was a fun episode. But, now we'll talk a little bit about, ice shows are really kicked off. The Blaine Hardwater Expo was this past weekend, and obviously the weekend before, me and Matt had the absolute pleasure of working over at the Cold Snap Outdoors booth with the dudes from Cold Snap, selling some covers and selling some raffle tickets for the Hooked on Hardwater. And met a lot of really cool people.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Saw a lot of cool stuff.
Had a few people come up and say that people that we didn't know.
Yep, I've got to give a guy a shout out who I talked to, and if you're listening here, I think his name was Derek or Dustin, and I think the last name was Rave, and I even tried to look him up on Facebook. He must not be on Facebook, but if you're listening, shoot us an email at MidwestAngler1, like the number 1, at gmail.com. I want to send you out a hat for coming up and talking with us. Like I said, I told you I'd give you a shout out, but I forgot the name, and I don't know. I have a tough enough time just making sure that I got a pair of socks on in the morning. So
Hard enough time remembering your own name sometimes, huh?
Yeah. I know my own cell phone number, but I don't know my own wife's. I know my brother's because it's one after mine, but that's it. Like, I'm just, that's not my strong suit. But
No, it was a fun time working that show, and
absolutely.
it was cool seeing all. What you bought a shack, right?
Yes, I did. Clam Nanook XL Thermal. Bought it from Craig Euler, so, I mean, that's pretty cool.
Did he sign it for you?
Well, he did.
should've
He
just put a
did, but
big
it was
Craig
invisible
Euler.
marker. So
Oh, okay.
when we get it underneath a black light, then it pops up. No, we got the chance to meet Dave Gens.
That was a lot of fun.
Holy mackerel!
Getting to
Like,
talk to him.
I was nervous as a
Yeah, I know you were.
like that was crazy. I mean, like, when you walked up to him, it wasn't what I expected. Like, nothing's ever what I expect, but there he was. He was just sitting on a stool, kind of hanging out, and it's
chilling.
like, hey, all right, this is gonna happen. But no, I had him sign a Midwest Angler Podcast hat. That was killer cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, and like you said, great guy.
Yeah, I'm a hat collector, not only for the ones that I wear on my hat, or on my head, but over on my gun safe over there, I've got Seth Fighter, I've got
Bill Dance,
Bill Dance,
the old Tennessee hat up there.
Yeah, I got a lot of killer cool ones. So yeah, just need to add to that collection with more anglers. So I had to take advantage of that opportunity. But yeah, no, it was cool talking with him. What was the coolest thing you think you saw out of all the stuff there at the Ice Institute?
Well, there's a lot of neat stuff. I'll say it, the new Cold Snap Redline Series rods are pretty sweet.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was nice to be able to get one in your hand and check it out, and the price point on them is just crazy.
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
half the price of what they should be.
right. It's that's probably one of the more things I'm excited to get to use this
Right.
winter. I saw a lot of the new Strike Master light flights. A lot of people were buying
A lot
those
of
up.
people. Yeah.
I don't know. I've always been happy with my K-Drill. I know that you have one. Eric has one.
I think the biggest gripe against the K-Drill, and everyone says, oh, they're so slow. Have you ever personally got into a hole drilling race?
Nope, I haven't personally. I
didn't know if I was the only one who hadn't.
sometimes I don't know if it's just because it's the new thing on, so everybody's buying this, and I have to buy it too. But I mean, I'm sure it's a good product, and it's probably going to have flaws, just like every new thing that comes out does.
The light flight.
Yeah, the light.
Oh yeah,
flight.
no,
So,
I'm 100% sure it's awesome. I mean, at the end of the day, every single auger on the market
right.
drills a hole. So
Well, yeah,
that's-
and some of them are like, oh yeah, I was able to get through my hole 5 seconds faster than my buddy did.
Yeah,
and it's
oh.
just like,
Man, in the span of a day, I bet you caught so many more fish.
it's like, all right.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
We
I
don't-
mean, the blades are different. I mean, they're chipper style blades, and then there's the shaver style blades. So I mean, that makes a difference for some people. But other than that, what about you? What was
I thought those Okuma bait feeder
Oh yeah, those
reels. My catfishing rods are Abu Garcia Ambassadors, and they've got that bait clicker on them.
Right.
And I thought it was really cool to see that in the
spinning reel.
spinning reel, and something that you can run on your dead stick,
Right.
Arctic Warriors, or the walleye snares from JT. All those. I think that they would just work spectacular, and I'm not going to lie, I will be purchasing some, and I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I'm going to do something with them. So
I just think it's cool just to see how far ice fishing is coming along, and just all the crazy things that are out there, and It's just neat to see.
Right.
And you can still go out there with just a basic setup and still have success.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And yeah, you don't have to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars. I mean,
Right.
me and you both started basically with not the greatest gear, and
I still run an FL8.
hey,
And there's
So does
some
my
people
brother.
there's some people that don't even have a flasher and they go out there and catch fish. So
I'm not gonna knock them, but there's no way I could do it.
it'd be tough.
After you run a flasher,
Right.
there's just no way. I don't know. Just to know that the fish are under you. It's one thing not to catch them, because after you know that the fish are down there, you're going to switch baits. You're going to
Yeah.
figure out, okay, what is going on? What am I doing wrong? But if I just had to sit out there and blindly jig and never know if there was even anything under me, I just couldn't do it. Like I said, for those who do, that's awesome. I mean, more power to you.
Right.
You want it worse than what I do, but
It makes a heck of a difference, that's for sure.
right. So, well, I guess with that, we will end episode 48.
That's right.
Episode 49 next week. 1 year.
1 year
That's 1 year that me and Matt have been doing this silly podcast.
sitting down here in your basement.
Every single, well, no, we've done a couple.
We've done a couple on the road.
Yep, but
Talked to old Lorith over at your parents' place in
That's right.
Okoboji.
we need to get him on again.
We do.
We need to. I don't know if there would be much fishing talked about or if it would just be throwing cheap shots at each
Right.
other, but that's all right too.
That's right.
It's our show. We can do what we want, guys.
He might want his sidekick Ramsey along or something
Oh,
like that.
geez.
So
They'd probably be in a couch making out. All right, this one's going off the rails. Episode 48 is done. We will see you next week on the 1 year anniversary show, episode 49. Thanks, guys.